Welcome back, everyone. This is our third in the series of the Lightboard sessions that are helping you review the 5 courses in the MicroMasters in Supply Chain Management curriculum. So this is SC2x, Supply Chain Design, and this is the most important class in my opinion because it's the linchpin of the 5 classes. So you've already taken 0 and 1x, and if you look to half of what SC2x does, they're really all the same in that these are all looking at models. We developed a toolbox in SC0x, introduced you to a bunch of different tools, optimization, statistics, regression, probability, things like that. In SC1x, we introduced the fundamental trade-offs in inventory and transportation, shortage and excess, and things along those lines. And in the first half of SC2x, we'll introduce models of network design. However, in the second half of SC2x and going forward, it's a little bit different. We move away from pure quantitative analytical models, and we start introducing more reality. And what I mean by reality are all those conditions that are not captured in the model. So some of the more qualitative aspects of supply chain management, that's what gets introduced. And it all falls within SC2x because that balances both sides. It's the middle course, and it kind of combines both aspects. So it's called supply chain design because we look at the design of 3 main flows. We have the information flow from the buyer and the seller, so we have information. And then we assume there's a physical flow from the supplier back to the buyer, a physical. And then we have an information flow, or a financial flow rather, from the buyer back to the supplier. Money or financial flow. So these are the 3 flows, and in addition to these 3 classic flows, there's also more information going back and forth as the transaction is progressing, but this captures the essence of supply chain management. It's the management of the different flows, information, physical, and financial. So the first half of SC2x, we focused on physical design. We started with the granddaddy, network design. This is where you might have some suppliers in these pink squares, some distribution centers in these triangles, and these customer locations or customer DCs in the circles. And your job is to determine which facilities to use, which facilities to open, and then which facilities serve which facilities. And for these, we used our old friend mixed integer linear programs where we're minimizing cost traditionally, and where that's a function of some x, where x is how much is flowing on each of the arcs, plus there could be a fixed cost if I open a facility or not, and it's subject to a whole bunch of different restrictions. And these could have a bunch of different restrictions that the flow in has to equal the flow out, I have to meet demand, I can't exceed supply, all these different constraints, and they all fit really nicely in the mixed integer linear programming formulation that you should all be very comfortable with. We take that same approach, the mixed integer linear program, and move to our next topic, which is production planning. And this kind of includes both physical flow, but also some of the information flow, because what we talked about and we discovered is this is how companies communicate. So if you look at the physical design, this is facilities based. If I go down to production planning, I'm now looking at the product. And so if I have this product right here, I can look at it in 2 ways. I can look upstream or downstream. If I look upstream, I'm looking at the sub-assemblies that make that product, and then the raw components that go into that sub-assembly that go into the product. Downstream, I'm going to distribution centers, maybe regional distribution centers, then down to retail stores, and maybe down to final customers. So you have a flow here, and it looks like it comes from many into one and back out again, and that's a hallmark of a production plan for a product. This is our bill of material of all the things that come in, and we have to manage the distribution plan. Now on this extreme, we have the sales that drive what happens, and on this other end, it's the purchase orders that we're making. And so what we covered in production planning is how to plan the distribution resource planning, the DRP, the master production schedule of when to produce what and using what products and where. And that fits into the MRP, or the material requirements planning, that kind of dictates when do we order things from our different suppliers. This ties together with something we introduced called the sales and operations planning, and we talk even more about in SC3x, and that's the idea of how do I balance my sales, my marketing side with my operations side. How do I bring those together? Sales and operations planning is a really formal process that every company is starting to use to coordinate these things together. Now, the mixed integer linear program that we use really sits right here in the MPS, the master production scheduling, and there's a lot of other long-range planning, but we're using the same math to solve two very different problems. Now, we wrapped up this design part by talking about channel strategies, because if you have any product that comes to you, whether it's a bottled water, a smartphone, anything that comes to you that was manufactured, it can come in many different paths. So if you can think about a simplified set of players here, you have a manufacturer, a distributor, a retailer, and then the customer itself. You can think of different channels that it comes to. And the traditional channel that I've kind of outlined here is where the manufacturer ships it to a distributor. The distributor ships it to a retailer, to their DC, and then they move it to their stores, and then it eventually gets to a customer. But it doesn't need to be that way. Sometimes the manufacturer can go straight to the retailer, and then the customer can pick it up. That's kind of a drop ship where they skip this whole side of a distributor. And you might have even more common that's happening now where you go direct to customer or direct to store, where you bypass all of these things and you go direct to the person who's procuring that, who's buying that product. We're seeing more of this with e-commerce, but there's a lot of strategies here in how it mixes up. How I set up my channels dictates how I want to set up my production plan, also dictates how I want to set up my network design. And with the introduction of new technologies, it's really having a ripple effect in how I set up my network design. It's changing a lot of things, especially in the retailing segment. So that's the first half. That's all the modeling that we did, very heavy optimization based. Then we move to the second half of SC2x and we start getting into more information flow things. And one of the areas that we focus on is procurement. And that's, again, how do I work upstream? How do I work with my suppliers? And we introduce a bunch of different concepts. I think the thing that kind of ties it all together is this risk value framework, where I've got low and high risk, low and high value, and depending on your product, on the risk, and that risk is really a function of if I lose this product or this supplier, will I go out of business? Are there a lot of other competitors out there I can buy it from? Are they the sole source? And the value is simply usually monetary value of that item itself or the thing that it goes into. So you can segment this. It's a 2x2 because everything when you get this side of SC2x, you get more managerial and you get more 2x2 matrix kind of ideas or frameworks rather than specific mathematical models. But this helps you segment your approach. So if you have something high value, high risk, you want to be very strategic in how you work with them, set up a partnership. You want to be very engaged. Contrast that with something that really is low value, low risk. So if I'm looking at procuring paper clips, I'm not going to form a strategic relationship with my paper clip supplier, right? I'm going to treat them very tactically. I want to minimize the effort it takes to procure. Then you can think of the other side. If it's a high value but low risk, you leverage that. You leverage your scale. And there's different techniques that you'll use, more auction oriented. And then you have something that's low value but it's a high risk. They're kind of at critical aspect. And you actually want to move away from that area. You want to try to move somewhere else. That's not a good place to be. So this framework is a great way to understand all of your products that you have that you're procuring, how you segment them, and then how you approach each of those different segments. We wrapped up talking about supply chain finance. And this is kind of the transition point. And so this is where we're focusing in on that financial flow. And now what we've done so far, we've all talked the language of supply chain. We've talked about inventory, lead time, lowering variability. Now we're going to talk to the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. So how do I translate my supply chain stuff into things that they care about, that the CFO cares about? And because the CFO's tools are the income statements. This is the profit loss, the balance sheets, and the cash flows. They're looking at financial flows. They really don't care if you have a DC somewhere. They care about how it's affecting the financial flows within the company. So the tools that you have, that we teach you, are three big tools. First, activity-based costing, so you can actually cost out what your actions are and try to understand what are the best practices you can do to improve the efficiency of that process. Activity-based costing really ties a lot to SC1x when we did our total cost equation, It's how do I find what the cost of placing an order is. So it's a technique that lets you use some of those models that we showed you in SC1x. Cash to cash cycle time, that's the whole idea. If I look at this process, I'm putting money in, if I'm the producer, the manufacturer, I'm putting money in here and I'm getting money back from the sales. What's that total time? What's the total time from when I have to invest till I get my money back in my revenue? Cash to cash cycle time. And then we also look at discounted cash flow analysis. When I make these investments, I try to understand, how do I justify opening a DC? This might make sense from a flow, but doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint. How will I look at that if the flows occur over time? So I have a big fixed cost investment and I expect some benefit over a number of years. And so this is a tool to help you understand how to make those trade-offs in different decisions for investments. So this is SC2x. It's probably the most broad-reaching of the 5 classes because it's tying together all the modeling aspects, uses some heavy optimization models, and it ties into some of the softer side of things, and again, bridges over to the finance side. So this is SC2x. Good luck studying, and good luck on the exam.